I'm going to be with my real family now, so I don't need you. Let's just get a divorce already." After 3 years of working away from home, my husband had not only had an affair but also had a child. I was shocked that all this had happened without my knowledge. It was an unforgivable betrayal, but I had already become indifferent to it. "Dad, you don't know anything about Mom," my daughter said, marking the beginning of our new life. There was no longer any place for my husband in it. He got what he deserved, so he might as well suffer. "My name is Cecile Wood. I met my husband Omar in college in a literary circle we both belonged to. I enjoyed reading and writing novels, which is why I joined, but Omar joined for a completely different reason. He was 2 years my senior and had a dream of becoming a teacher. Originally, he was poor at interpreting novels and stories, and he joined the circle to acquire the skills necessary to become a teacher. His first love was a female teacher at the time, who was beautiful and easily recognized due to her beauty mark. At first, he had a female teacher he admired and said his ideal was to become a teacher like her. However, when I delved a little deeper into the conversation, Omar admitted that the teacher was his first love. "You often hear stories about first loves being a teacher when you were a child, right?" he said, smiling shyly, which I fondly remember. As for myself, I once harbored a dream of becoming a novelist. However, seeing my friends in the literary department, trying and, despite being more talented than me, failing in the end, I gave up on pursuing it thinking it was impossible for me. In contrast, I was gradually drawn to Omar, who continued to strive straight towards his dream. It didn't take long for our friendship within the circle to develop into a romantic relationship. We spent 4 years of college life together, and Omar successfully completed his education program while dating me. He was supposed to realize his dream by getting his teaching license right after graduation, but was hindered by the barriers of the teacher employment examination. Although generally, there has recently been a decline in the demand for teachers, in our area, many people aspire to become teachers, and Omar had been unable to pass the exam for several years. Unable to secure a teaching position, he gradually started to panic about being unemployed. In the meantime, he chose to work temporarily as a tutor at a public tutoring center. This center is a non-profit educational institution operated by the local government, established to support children who cannot afford private tutoring due to financial reasons. Omar applied here, hoping that the experience would help him realize his dream. It seems the tutoring center was eager for someone with his educational background. Eventually, Omar became a tutor at the public center, but his true desire was to secure a position as a teacher. Having witnessed his efforts and struggles up close, I sincerely wanted to support him in realizing his dream. When I expressed my feelings, he proposed to me. He had been considering marrying me for a while, but hesitated to propose due to his unsatisfactory situation. Hearing my feelings, he felt that we could build a future together and decided to commit. "Cecile, I might put you through a lot in the future, but I still want us to support each other and be happy. Will you walk through life with me?" Struck by his sincere gaze, I nodded emphatically to his words without hesitation. Soon after, we got married. Our married life was blissful. After I quit the publishing company where I had been working, I became a full-time housewife and supported him in pursuing his dream with all my might. During that time, I found a work-from-home job through company connections, which helped with our finances. Meanwhile, Omar continued to work as a tutor at the public center while also striving to become a teacher. With the birth of our daughter Jewel, we grew even more respectful and supportive of each other. Jewel became a presence that further strengthened the bonds of our family. However, as years passed without him passing the exams, Omar reconsidered his thoughts. Being a tutor at a public tutoring center is also a way of being a respectable teacher, isn't it? Why was I so fixated on being a school teacher? Yes, I think that's a good idea. It is true that the children Omar taught improved their grades, and they admired him as a teacher. Therefore, I didn't think his decision was a mistake, and it shouldn't be a problem to see it as one dream realized. Thus, he was satisfied that he had achieved his dream, albeit as a tutor, and he regarded it as his lifelong career. Looking back, however, I feel that this decision significantly changed Omar. Initially, there was no noticeable change, but as time went by, his formerly serious lifestyle began to change. This could be due to the discontinuation of the effort he had been making to become a teacher. Or perhaps it was a result of being released from long-term tension. There was also the possibility of frustration from giving up on the path to becoming a teacher. In any case, the exact cause was unclear, but his behavior became erratic. Omar, who once drank very little, began to get drunk at home frequently. Furthermore, Omar, who never used to come home late, began to return late at night more often and stopped explaining why. Previously, he would actively play with Jewel on holidays, but now he immersed himself in his hobby, gaming, and had left all the household chores to me. We used to respect and support each other, so how did it come to this? I've expressed my feelings to Omar several times. At first, he showed effort to improve, but as time went on, he began to justify himself and became defiant. I'm the head of this household, so I can do whatever I want. You should respect me more. But Omar, didn't we say we would support each other and live together? Did I really say that? What? Shocked by his nonchalant response, I took another look at him. The gaze that once looked straight at me was gone, and even during our conversations, his eyes wandered and he was distracted. The physique Omar was careful to maintain, so as not to embarrass his students, had become neglected and out of shape. The version of him that used to talk to me about his dreams was almost completely gone now. The Omar, who was once a good husband and father to Jewel and me, was no longer here. He showed no intention of helping even when carrying heavy loads, and had lost all interest in Jewel's educational path. Cecile, you give me orders so easily, but I earn more than you, so stop it. Every time I asked him for something, he deflected the conversation like that. However, he still retained a minimum level of affection for his family, participated in family events like birthdays, and had never been violent. Knowing the Omar of the past, I couldn't help but hope that someday things might improve. Amidst this situation, it was decided that Omar would be assigned to a remote island for 3 years. He was chosen as the staff for a public tutoring center on the island and accepted the offer without consulting us. Why didn't you discuss it with us when Jewel was facing such a tough time with her exams? Jewel has become a senior in high school and recently got into a new hobby, watching video game streams, often on her smartphone. Recently, a popular streamer made headlines for a controversial statement, emphasizing the importance of internet literacy. I believe it's necessary for her to have some relaxation during her exam period, so I haven't been particularly cautious. And because changes in the environment often lead to mental strain, I've been as supportive as possible. Despite this, Omar decided on his long-term assignment on his own. When I asked him what he was thinking, he sighed as if it were a hassle. It's just about going on a solo assignment for 3 years, right? That's true. But are you really okay with that, Omar? Are you sure you'll be fine alone? I'm an adult. There shouldn't be any problems. He yawned as if to show that it wasn't a big deal. It's not about that. Wasn't he worried about Jewel and me? Going to be apart for 3 years. Didn't he feel any loneliness? Before I could voice my concerns, Omar cut me off with a sigh. The solo assignment is already decided. Let's drop this topic. If you're worried about living expenses, I'll make sure to send money home, he said, forcefully ending the conversation. Things moved quickly from there. The arrangements for his assignment were steadily made, and in no time, Omar had gone to the remote island. Without having enough discussions with Jewel or me, worried about him, I decided to call him every day. It was clear that his lifestyle would become disordered if he lived alone. Enough already. I'm going crazy here. At first, Omar responded to my calls, but gradually he seemed to find them annoying and advised me not to call unless it was important. Considering Jewel and wanting to avoid conflict within the family, I accepted his wishes. Thus, our interactions with Omar as a family nearly ceased. There were occasions, like New Year's, when Omar would return home, but he showed no joy in seeing us again after a long time and would mostly just play with his smartphone during our conversations. "Dad, what are you doing on your smartphone?" Whether it was an attempt to remind him of our presence or just casual conversation, Jewel asked in a light tone. "What does it matter? I can do whatever I want." Omar's reply was surly and tinged with irritation, and Jewel and I were taken aback. I was having a meeting with colleagues on the island. Startled by our reaction, Omar began to explain, but he looked visibly uncomfortable. It got awkward and doubts began to form in my mind. Having spent many years together as a couple, one can sense whether there are secrets. Omar was hiding something from us. However, what exactly it was not yet clear at that point. Still, Omar's suspicious behavior had begun to become more noticeable. He forgot the Christmas gifts he used to send to his parents every year. Even the wedding anniversary that he somehow remembered until last year went unnoticed this year. There was no contact even on Jewel's birthday, and the final straw was the unexplained withdrawals from our shared bank account. When I questioned him about it, Omar claimed he didn't remember. The shared account held our savings and was meant for important expenses like Jewel's tuition. It pained my heart to know that he was tampering with money meant for our child's future. There were many suspicious actions, but I just couldn't overlook the unexplained withdrawals. "You can't possibly not remember. What are you using it for?" "It's not like it's a significant amount. You're always nagging about minor stuff." Omar's attitude during our rare phone calls was far from the serious person he used to be. Even if it's his private time, it's hard to imagine him as the respectable person who stands in front of students. While I was stunned by our call, Omar said something unbelievable. "I decided to move because the apartment I'm renting at the assignment location has become too cramped." Wait, but isn't your 3-year term almost up? The move seemed like a waste to me. I couldn't help but raise my voice, but Omar didn't care and quickly retorted. I couldn't help it since it was bothering me. "Stop nagging, I'm paying the living expenses." "You say you're paying, but the amount has been decreasing lately, hasn't it? Since around New Year's, the amount transferred as living expenses has been a few $100s less each time." Despite this, Omar had been withdrawing large amounts for his move. It would be odd not to say anything about this. However, even when pressed, Omar only gave vague responses. "Living here is tough for me too. You're always complaining even though I'm the one providing." You say providing, but..." "Enough. I don't want to hear any complaints. I told you before, stop telling me what to do unless you can earn more than me. Isn't that embarrassing for you?" Omar interrupted me and yelled, then unilaterally hung up the phone. After that, there was no further contact from Omar, and my attempts to reach him were completely ignored with no response. In this state, the 3-year assignment period came to an end. Although his solo assignment should have been over, there was no contact about Omar's belongings being sent back, and we had no idea what he planned to do next. I tried to get information from the public tutoring center, but due to strict confidentiality, I couldn't obtain any. One day, suddenly, our doorbell rang. Since it was a holiday and Jewel was also home, we looked at each other and rushed to the entrance. "Ah, it's been a while." The person at the door was undoubtedly Omar, but he was not alone. Next to him stood a woman I didn't recognize. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, a beautiful woman with a distinctive mole under one of her eyes. "Ah." Jewel looked pensive seeing the woman. Could she be an acquaintance of hers? The woman was holding a baby about 1-year-old, who was quietly sleeping. For now, I decided to think about her later and focused on Omar's first words. It wasn't, "I'm home," but rather, "It's been a while, I think." As I was perplexed by what was going on, the woman greeted us lightly. However, with that kind of smile, her expression seemed somewhat condescending. "Madam, nice to meet you. I am Tana Brooks." Nice to meet you. I'm Cecile Wood." After stating my name, Omar couldn't suppress his laughter. Did I say something wrong?" As I asked in confusion, Omar answered with an unpleasant smirk. "Just thinking that today might be the last day you can use that last name made me laugh." "Haha, my apologies. What do you mean?" When I pressed him again, Omar answered without changing his expression. "I'm going to be with my real family now, so I don't need you. Let's just get a divorce already." Shocked by his sudden declaration of divorce, I was speechless. After 3 years of working away from home, my husband had not only had an affair but also had a child. I was shocked that all this had happened without my knowledge. "To be honest, I've been fed up with living with you guys for a long time," he said. Omar looked at me with a grin, seemingly enjoying my reaction. So, when I was assigned to the remote location, I thought I was lucky to be able to live alone, even if it was in the countryside. He continued. At that moment, Omar looked meaningfully at Tana Brooks. Tana also received his gaze and smiled slyly. "Meeting Tana was really lucky for me," Omar added. According to Omar, Tana worked at a supermarket on the remote island where he was stationed. Their meeting occurred soon after he arrived there. On the entertainment-scarce island, Omar was attracted to Tana, who was more sophisticated and charming than anyone else. It seems Tana felt the same way about him. "So, you mean, you had an affair with Ms. Brooks at the assignment location? And this child, is it?" "Yeah, that's right. It's mine and Tana's child." Despite the simultaneous revelation of the affair and the secret child, Omar appeared to feel no guilt. Along with Tana, he seemed to be watching our reactions as if it were a spectacle. It's strange, isn't it? I was fed up with my family, and then I met someone who looked just like my first love. It must be fate. Huh. Tana is young, but unlike you, she isn't a nuisance. She accepted everything about me from the moment we first met. Whether it's true or not is unclear, but Omar seems to believe it. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so infatuated. Seeing Omar fawning over a younger woman, as if he were drunk, I rapidly felt my emotions cooling down. And then I was certain. The Omar I once loved and vowed to support each other no longer existed in this world. All that time spent in a fake family life was completely meaningless, he said, seemingly enjoying himself, oblivious to my disappointment. Today, everything finally ends. I'm going to be with my real family now, so let's just get a divorce. As I listened to Omar's words, all his suspicious behaviors suddenly made sense. The reason he neglected us and even forgot our anniversaries must have been because he was infatuated with Tana Brooks. The money withdrawals and even the move were all to prepare for a new life with Tana. No, it would be more natural to assume they were already living together. Either way, it's certain that he was using our family money for someone who was a stranger to us. Tana surely understood that too. That's why they were shamelessly clinging to each other in front of us, as if to flaunt it. I was utterly disappointed. If we get divorced, your life will be tough. I guess I'll have to pay you some sort of settlement. He proceeded unilaterally, even though I hadn't agreed to the divorce yet. I was at a loss for words, not knowing how to even start talking about it. They seemed to think I was grieving and hung my head in sorrow, smirking at me. Seeing how relaxed the two of them were, an idea suddenly came to me. They came to visit all the way from the remote island, even bringing the baby along. Perhaps they were trying to provoke me into making a move, using that as leverage to gain an advantage in the divorce settlement. If my thoughts were correct, I was speechless at how Omar might perceive me as a hot-tempered and coarse person. "Dad, you don't know anything about Mom, do you?" Jewel, who had been looking something up on her smartphone, stopped and looked up. She sighed heavily, looking at Omar with disdain, a reaction that would seem unnatural for the scenario they had planned. Omar, puzzled, asked, "What are you talking about?" "Wow, I'm appalled." "Just wait a moment," Jewel said, and went into the back of the house, returning a few minutes later with a book in hand. She handed it to Omar. I let out a small ah, recognizing the book. Omar, unaware of my reaction, took the book while still confused and shifted his gaze to the cover. "What's this novel?" "The author is." "This is," he exclaimed, recognizing the name. Apparently he vaguely remembered the name, and naturally he reacted this way. That's because the cover of the novel bore the pen name I, Cecile Wood, had used since my days in the literary club. While Tana Brooks, unaware of the situation, looked perplexed, Omar asked loudly, "Did you write this book?" Tana, catching on from Omar's words, also let out a small gasp of surprise. I had been unsure how to start the conversation, but Jewel had created the opportunity. Looking at Jewel, she seemed proud, as if pleased with the successful counterattack. I smiled softly, grateful for my resourceful daughter, and turned back to Omar and Tana. "Yes, I wrote this book." "Omar, do you remember that I've been working from home all this time?" "Ah, yes. You were getting work from the publishing house you used to work for." He seemed to remember the past quite well. Yes, I had been working from home as a writer ever since we got married. Initially, they might have given me work out of sympathy after I left the publishing house, but as I continued, my writing skills steadily improved. "You remember well." "Yes, I've been working all along." I was able to earn a considerable amount from my writing assignments, but I didn't stop there. I continued to hone my skills. I thought maybe now I could become the writer I once dreamed of being. With that thought, I decided to take a bold step and entered a novel contest. It turns out I could write much better than I ever imagined, and now I am actually a novelist. My work will soon be adapted into a movie, I continued. "A novelist, and it's becoming a movie? Is that true?" What do you mean by a movie? That's not what we were talking about." Omar and Tana exclaimed in astonishment. Of course, when I started this journey, I faced many setbacks and continuous struggles. Just as Omar couldn't become a teacher, my path as a writer was not easy. Moreover, I started chasing my dream again around the time Jewel graduated from elementary school. It might have been too late to aspire to be a writer. I applied many times and was repeatedly rejected, but I kept trying and gradually made it through the first and second rounds of selections. Right after Omar started his solo assignment, I finally won an award and published a book. The published book was well received by many readers, and my pen name became widely recognized. Subsequent works were also highly praised, and fortunately, they went through multiple reprints. With the success of my works, my financial situation naturally improved. That's why the real breadwinner of our house has been Mom for a long time. What? What do you mean? He was shaken and seemed unable to grasp the situation immediately. Jewel looked at Omar and explained slowly with a wry smile. Mom has published several books, all of which have been hits. Some are even going to be made into movies soon. I don't know the details about the money, but I think it's a lot more than what you earn, Dad. At those words, Omar seemed to finally comprehend the reality. His mouth agape, he was stunned by the shocking truth. Indeed, everything Jewel said was correct. I might have been inferior in my first year as a writer, but from the next year onwards, I clearly surpassed Omar's annual income. That's because I never had to touch the money Omar sent from his second year onwards. In short, his pride in supporting us was a foolish misconception born from neglecting his family. That's why there's no need to worry about our finances. So, I said, looking towards Jewel, Mom, it's okay. Don't worry about me. I don't want a family with someone who does such nonsensical and disgusting things either. Jewel seemed to understand what I was about to say and added her words. I'm glad you're here. Thank you, Jewel. So shall we go through with the divorce then? I was a bit surprised at how easily I could make that decision, but I quickly came to terms with it. I realized that the existence of my husband, Omar Wood, had completely vanished from my mind. Honestly, I could have made this decision when I became fully established as a novelist. The affair and secret child were only confirmed today, but as a wife, I had vaguely sensed it. I could have hired a detective agency at that point and made a decision based on their findings. However, I didn't do that because Jewel's exams were approaching and part of me still wanted to believe in Omar. But now, having heard reassuring words from Jewel, and knowing my feelings were already shattered by Omar himself, there was no reason to hesitate any longer. Of course, let's do that. Jewel nodded strongly, supporting my decision. That's how it is. Let's divorce as you wish, I told Omar with a smile. Omar was flustered and at a loss for words by the unexpected development. In the midst of this, then shouldn't you, madam, be the one to pay the settlement? Suddenly interjected Tana Brooks. What? Really? The statement was so lacking in common sense that not only Jewel and I, but even Omar showed expressions of astonishment. Ignoring the atmosphere around her, Tana continued to assert her demands. As a novelist, you must have a considerable income. Therefore, please pay compensation for the emotional distress Omar has suffered. That's right. There's some truth to that. Omar agreed with Tana's demands. Faced with their absurd and unbelievable statements, Jewel and I could only look on in dismay. Meanwhile, they continued their argument. How could you not feel ashamed for hiding such important things from me, the head of the family? I am hurt. Pay me compensation. This liar. Exactly as Omar says. Please pay the compensation. Tana supported him. No, I haven't lied, and in fact, it was you who were hiding things. Besides, I tried to talk about it several times, but you didn't even try to listen. I countered. I had tried several times to talk to Omar about my dream of becoming a novelist and the fact that my dream had come true. However, he dismissed it as trivial or misunderstood my talks as mere nagging, never really listening seriously. Still, if Omar had shown interest in my dreams, I was always ready to discuss them. But he completely ignored and dismissed my feelings and words. And gradually, I gave up on the idea of discussing them with Omar. Shut up. You've been deceiving me and trying to monopolize the money for yourself. Omar raised his voice. I was fed up and tired of his selfish, childlike arguments. As I was wondering how to wrap up the conversation and thinking about how to resolve it, Jewel spoke up. Dad. It seemed she was hesitant about how to address Omar, perhaps because she had refused to consider him as part of the family. If you say you're being deceived, isn't it actually Tana that's deceiving you, Dad? What are you suddenly talking about? Right, Ms. Tana. Or should I say, Ms. Sugar? Ignoring Omar, who didn't understand, Jewel addressed Tana with that name. I was unaware of the name Sugar, but it clearly held significant meaning for Tana, as her face turned pale immediately upon hearing it. Jewel, can you explain what this means? I asked, and Jewel began to explain. Mom, you know I like game streaming, right? It was just before Dad went on his solo assignment. There was a minor scandal in that community. According to Jewel, about 3 years ago, a popular female game streamer among men and a popular male game streamer among women were rumored to be dating. Initially, both denied the rumors, so it didn't lead to a major controversy. However, rumors of the male streamer dating another female streamer emerged, changing the situation drastically. The female streamer who caused the scandal claimed she had been cheated on. Flipping her initial stance of denial, she revealed that she was still dating the male streamer and was now pregnant. This worsened the situation, and the parties involved insisted they were not at fault. The exchange of accusations continued, and especially the female streamer who first caused the scandal became emotional, making statements that turned all her fans against her, leading to a major scandal. As a result, her past inappropriate comments and failures were exposed online, significantly damaging her popularity as a streamer, and she vanished from the internet scene as if fleeing. That vanished streamer was the person known as Sugar. I recalled that Jewel had talked about the scandal back then. At the time, she was discussing the importance of internet literacy, so she didn't mention the specific streamer's name. Sugar was a very beautiful game streamer known for her beauty mark, and of course her gaming skills were also top-notch. I remember because I watched her stream several times, said Jewel. What are you talking about? I don't understand, Tana said, visibly shaken. Her gaze was unsteady, and her hands trembled slightly. What does that even mean? Omar said, clearly struggling to keep up. Were you even listening? That's why you get deceived, Jewel retorted sharply. Omar grimaced at her merciless words. Despite being exasperated, Jewel continued. Didn't I say? Sugar was pregnant while she was dating that male streamer. How? Omar finally grasped the situation and reacted with a stunned expression. If Jewel's story was true and Tana was indeed Sugar who had actually been pregnant, what happened to that child? It meant that the baby Tana was currently carrying could potentially be that child. As Jewel suggested, Omar had been deceived. Tana might have lied that the baby was Omar's, potentially leading him to unknowingly raise someone else's child. Realizing this, Omar grabbed Tana's shoulder and demanded, "Tana, you're lying, right? You told me it was my child." Tana did not meet Omar's eyes as he shook her shoulder. Her behavior said it all. This baby was not Omar's. "No, how could this be?" Omar screamed. He let go of her shoulder and held his head with both hands. Tears streamed down his face, and his mouth trembled. For Omar, this was undoubtedly the worst possible scenario. He had left his tiresome family life behind and found what he thought was fate on a remote island. He had poured his love into a beautiful woman who reminded him of his first love, and he had been actively caring for what he believed was their precious child, just likely supporting them just as he had once done for Jewel when she was young. Now, after 3 years of solo assignment, he was trying to start everything anew as a family. However, the very foundation of raising a beloved child together with her turned out to be a lie. The despair that followed is unimaginable. If it were me from over 10 years ago, I might have rushed to comfort Omar. But now I no longer hold such feelings for him. I might feel a bit of pity for him, but that's all. "I'm so sorry, really sorry." Crying out like a scream, Tana sat down on the ground. "Don't mess around with me. I even moved to start a new life with you guys using my salary. That's why I'm apologizing." Tana retorted in a sulky manner. "What did you say?" Omar shouted angrily, revealing his anger. And finally, the baby Tana was holding woke up. It was almost surprising that the baby had been asleep until now, and it began to cry as it looked around. "You old geezer, you made the baby cry." Tana glared at Omar. "What? Old geezer?" It was probably the first time Tana had ever thrown such words at him. Omar was stunned by this new nickname. But considering the age difference, to Tana, he indeed was an old geezer. Jewel could barely hold back her laughter at the bewildered Omar. "Then," I said, "if you want to calm the baby, may I hold him for a bit?" and sat next to Tana. "Ah, yes." I gently took the baby from Tana, cradled him softly, and rocked him slowly from side to side. It seems my past experience with childcare was still useful. The baby gradually stopped crying and eventually showed us a calm smile. Witnessing this, Tana and Omar were left speechless, as if their venom had been drained. In the now quiet space, I continued in a calm voice. "You were acting all high and mighty just now, but aren't you being ridiculous too, Omar? What do you mean by neglecting Jewel and me like this?" That was, well, yes, it was a momentary lapse of judgment. Omar almost raised his voice again, but Jewel admonished him by saying, "Dad." Then she put her index finger to her lips and motioned for silence. Perhaps not wanting to upset the child any further, Omar continued in a subdued voice. "The real family for me are only you two, Cecile and Jewel. I was deceived by her. Please forgive me. I beg you," he pleaded. Had it not been for his earlier actions, his words might have sounded touching. However, the fact that they had belittled and insulted us could not be erased. "Unfortunately, we can no longer consider you family." Today's events were decisive, but I couldn't ignore everything that had built up until now. I was certain that the rift between us and Omar could not be mended. Well then, I'll be proceeding with the divorce. Please prepare to settle the property division properly. And, Tana. I stated this with an emotionless demeanor that brooked no argument. Yes. Like Omar, her face had turned pale. I could guess that she wouldn't have the means to pay for the property settlement. She likely approached Omar with the intention of financial support for child raising and living expenses. So I leaned closer to her, whispering softly enough so Omar couldn't hear. You don't want to pay the compensation for deceiving us, do you? At this question, she teared up and nodded vigorously. If you help me gather evidence of your affair with Omar, I might consider reducing the compensation for you. If Omar resists in the upcoming discussions, the divorce might not proceed smoothly. Though it irks me to reduce her part of the compensation, with her cooperation and the help of a lawyer, it should be manageable. After a moment of contemplation, Tana nodded vigorously again. Relieved, I let out a sigh, and then, noticing the baby sleeping blissfully unaware of the worldly concerns, I couldn't help but give a wry smile. About a couple months later, Omar and I officially completed our divorce. Of course, Omar was required to pay a fair share of the property division. I also gained custody of Jewel. During the divorce, I reported the affair to his family, and with their mediation, the child support payments were handled fairly. Omar's parents apologized for his actions, and while it pained them to see us hurt, our relationship with them remained good as before. Although Omar readily accepted the divorce and property division, he persistently pleaded to start over with us again. He insisted that he was the victim and that Tana was to blame. This unseemly behavior infuriated his parents, who sternly reprimanded him, eventually leading him to give up, but it prolonged the divorce proceedings. As for Tana, since she cooperated in gathering evidence of the affair, I reduced her settlement as promised and allowed her to pay in installments. However, her trials didn't end there. The original reason Tana lived on the remote island was to find a quiet place to live until the heat from her scandal cooled off. However, that plan proved naive. It's unclear whether someone among the islanders recognized her as Sugar or if someone traced her steps, but that information spread online. As a result, some on the internet suggested causing her harm. Tana was forced to leave the island and has since been moving from place to place. Omar, who had planned to marry Tana and continue teaching on the island, saw his social standing deteriorate as the facts about the divorce spread from his workplace. Though teachers are sometimes regarded as moral figures, lecturers are also expected to guide others. Being involved in an affair as a teacher brought widespread condemnation, and Omar could not endure the pressure, ultimately deciding to leave the field of education. Furthermore, the tutoring center where Omar worked before his assignment was informed of the situation, making it impossible for him to teach locally. Reluctantly, he decided to work in manual labor, but due to his poor physical condition, he couldn't endure the hardships and is now quite weakened. Recently, during a discussion at his parents' house, they showed me a photo of his first love, the teacher, but honestly, aside from the beauty mark, she bore no resemblance to Tana. It was probably just an excuse for his escapism. Sometimes, I think about what could have been if Omar had never forgotten his initial aspirations and had continued to pursue his dream of becoming a teacher. If he had followed that path, perhaps our whole family could have been happy. But that is merely hypothetical. Omar chose his own path of downfall and continued to walk down that path. Now I simply hope that he fulfills his obligations for property division and child support payments and thereafter lives a righteous life. As for myself, I am enjoying successful days as a novelist. I proposed a story based on these experiences to my editor, and it was very well received, so I might continue writing it. Jewel, on the other hand, is thriving in her school life, unaffected by the divorce. Initially, I was concerned that it might impact her somehow, but it appears that there was no need to worry as she seems unaffected. Still, I cannot dismiss the possibility that she might be experiencing stress unconsciously. We plan to enjoy a lavish meal together soon. What the future holds for us is uncertain. However, as a mother, I have vowed to ensure that Jewel and I live happily together. My name is Ashley Hansen. I am currently a 32-year-old housewife. My husband Sean, who is 38 years old, is a mama's boy and verbally abusive. We are a family of 4, including our 10-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter. After getting married, I have been living with my husband's parents, and for several years now, I have been troubled by my mother-in-law's whims. When I talk to my husband about it, he only says, "Just listen to what my mother says." It seems that my mother-in-law thinks of me as a slave she can use freely. She calls me right after waking up saying, "Come wake me up early," and my day starts by pulling her out of bed with my hands. Then I take her to the bathroom, help her change clothes, and then guide her to the living room for breakfast. My mother-in-law is physically disabled and needs my help to move around. Especially in the mornings, it is difficult for her to walk, but by afternoon, her body loosens up a bit, and she can walk slowly. "Hey, bring me some hot tea quickly. I'm done eating." "Yes, the water will boil soon," I reply, only to be yelled at. "Why didn't you boil the water beforehand? You know that I always have tea after meals." "Yesterday," she said, "don't boil the water until I finish eating." It seems that my mother-in-law enjoys making me suffer. I have been married to Sean for 10 years, but his mother's walking difficulties appeared only in the last 5 years, and they seem to be worsening despite hospital visits. I have suggested walking together as a form of rehabilitation, but she does not listen. Before she had difficulty walking, we used to cook and shop together and got along well. Gradually, she became verbally abusive towards me and started treating me like a slave. She used to call me Ash, but now she calls me Hey or Airhead. Despite this, I cared for her and depended on her in the past, so I try to accept the current difficult situation, but I feel sad when I remember how she used to be. Of course, I consult my husband about this every day. However, all he says is, "Just listen to what my mother says," and he does not listen to me at all when I talk about her health condition. Therefore, I record videos as proof that I have informed him whenever something happens so that he cannot say, "I didn't know, I wasn't aware." After a day of being yelled at and following unreasonable orders until my mother-in-law went to bed, a phone call from my sister-in-law made things even worse. "Hey, Susan is coming back home because she's giving birth, so make sure you take care of her properly." I had not even heard that she was pregnant, let alone married, and now she is coming back to give birth. "Mother, when did Susan get married?" "I didn't know about it. I just found out too. But she said she's coming back." "Do you have a problem with what I ordered?" she yelled loudly. From her words, I realized that I was seen only as a slave and as a caretaker for Susan. I judged that asking further would only upset her more, so I just replied, "Yes, I understand," and ended the conversation. When I went out to buy ingredients for dinner and returned home, there were piles of cardboard boxes in front of the entrance. My son ran up to me as if waiting for my return. "Mom, Auntie says she's going to live here, and she says to make my room hers." "Do something," he said. Then my daughter also came, running. They're saying I have to share a room with my brother. We can fit 2 beds, but there's only room for 1 desk, the children said, looking unhappy. I approached my mother-in-law in the living room to verify the situation. Mother, is what the children told me true? However, she started talking over me. Yes, if you heard it from the children, hurry up and move Tom's belongings to Mia's room. And for dinner, Susan wants to eat steak, so prepare that. I heard Susan was coming, but I didn't know about the children's rooms or that dinner would be steak all of a sudden. Then Susan suddenly started yelling at me. Hey, Ashley, you're not in a position to complain to Mom. You're just a parasite. Why are you acting so high and mighty? You should just listen to what Mom says and take care of her, she said, crossing her arms and glaring at me. The children were frightened by Susan's demeanor and hid behind me. To protect them, I said, I will discuss this with my husband, and took them to their room. Once we reached the room, the children said, when is that auntie going back? She's really angry and scary. Even as I was preparing dinner, the children were visibly anxious and didn't want to be left alone, staying close to me. Unable to wait until my husband finished work, I called him. Did you know that Susan is coming back here to give birth today? I asked, and he was surprised, not having heard about it either. After explaining the situation and talking about the children, he said, Mom said to empty one of the children's rooms, right? There's no problem with that. If you have to prepare steak for dinner because Susan wants, just obey Mom. It's natural for Susan to be angry, and you should explain it to the children yourself. But it's impossible to fit 2 beds and a desk in a small room. What are we supposed to do? That's not my problem. Figure it out yourself, my husband replied, leaving me feeling hopeless. Seeing my state, my son said, Mom, it's okay. We just have to endure it. And my daughter also encouraged me. We can endure it until Auntie leaves. It's all right. Indeed, it's just a matter of enduring until Susan gives birth. It's not like we have to endure forever, as the children have taught me, warming my heart. Right, we just have to endure until Auntie leaves, but after that, let's return the room to how it was I promised. I'm sorry for making you endure, I apologized, and the children, who had been looking anxious until now, smiled and said, hurry up and make dinner before Auntie gets angry. I then went to the kitchen, took out the meat from the freezer, and started preparing the steak. And not long after, my husband came home in a good mood. In his hand was a box of cake. As dinner time approached, the children came out of their room and were delighted to see the cake box. I thought my husband had bought the cake as an apology for making the children inconvenient and told them, we'll have the cake after dinner. However, I was mistaken. This cake is for Susan and Mom, my husband said matter-of-factly. But why didn't you buy one for the children too? Don't ask such obvious questions. I bought it because you made Mom and Susan feel bad. My daughter burst into tears, saying, we haven't done anything wrong, but my husband ignored her and handed the cake to his sister. While holding my crying daughter, I tried to change the subject. Susan, congratulations on your pregnancy. When is the baby due? I asked. Laughing, Susan replied, thank you. I think it's in October. I was stunned to realize she was only 3 months pregnant and already planning to give birth at home, with the intention of staying here for the entire time. No wonder her stomach wasn't showing at all. Then my mother-in-law asked, so when are you getting married? What's your partner like? Susan suddenly panicked and said, oh, my partner? Yes, he's the president of a company, and he's really busy right now, so he can't come over. but he's concerned about my health and thinks it's safer for me to be at my parents' house." I thought to myself, Susan is lying, and from her rushed response, there's a high chance that not only the pregnancy but also the marriage might be fabricated. Resolved to uncover the truth, I decided to call Susan's apartment and workplace the next day. After completing my daily routine of caring for my mother-in-law and seeing my husband and children off, I told my mother-in-law I'll be stepping out for a bit and left the house. My first stop was the apartment where Susan used to live. By chance, the janitor was working in front of Susan's room, so I approached him. "Do you know if a person named Susan Hansen lived in this room?" I asked. The janitor replied, "Are you an acquaintance of Ms. Hansen?" "Yes, I couldn't get in touch with her, so I came to check on her," I responded, and he seemed to believe me. "Actually, I've also been unable to contact Ms. Hansen. She's half a year behind on rent, and I've been worried she might have collapsed inside, so I was about to unlock the door," he said, asking me to check with him. I readily agreed. Receiving the key from the visibly nervous janitor, I said, "It would be terrible if she had collapsed. I'll go in first, please follow me," and open the door. The entryway was cluttered with envelopes and postcards marked urgent notice. I went in first and called out loudly, "Susan! Susan! Are you there?" As I moved further inside, a man sitting on the sofa, startled by our unexpected entry, exclaimed, "Who are you?" "I'm calling the police," as he reached for his smartphone. The janitor explained, "I am the janitor of this building. We couldn't get in touch with Ms. Hansen, so we entered the room out of concern. We thought she might have collapsed here." He then pressed, "This apartment is for single occupancy, but who are you? We might need to call the police on you." The man, flustered, quickly sat down and introduced himself. "My name is Nick. I am dating Ms. Hansen." Nick explained that Susan told him to wait here until me and the children moved out, since her brother was planning to get a divorce. Susan was plotting to get my husband to divorce me and drive me and the children out of our home. Shocked by this revelation, I struggled to contain my voice and calmed myself. "I am an acquaintance of Susan. I was worried because I couldn't reach her. I heard she was pregnant. Is the child yours?" Nick replied with a look of surprise, "Pregnant." He was in an affair with Susan despite being married, and his divorce had been instigated when his ex-wife discovered the affair. Nick, a candidate for the next president at his father-in-law's company, saw his workplace position jeopardized by the divorce and was forced to resign. Having lost everything, Nick ended up relying on Susan's hospitality. He mentioned having a son from his previous marriage and expressed no intention of having another child with Susan, considering the harm the divorce had caused his son. While cohabitating with Susan, he couldn't stop thinking about his former family and regretted his actions, shedding tears. I wondered why he was sharing such personal information with strangers like us. He revealed that he had been troubled for a long time and wanted to confide in someone. The janitor asked, "Why do you stay with Ms. Hansen indefinitely?" and pointed out that it might be disrespectful to her, and suggested he reconsider his relationship with his former family. After some thought, Nick resolved to make a call, apparently to his ex-wife. He apologized for his mistakes and vowed to live in a way that would make her and his son proud, asking for a chance to prove his changed self. After ending the call, he apologized to us for his past behavior and resolved to start afresh, living independently and striving to be a father his son wouldn't be ashamed of. Finally, he thanked us for helping him see clearly, packed his belongings into a bag and left the room. After he departed, the janitor regretted not asking Nick to contact Susan for him. "Who is Ms. Hansen's guarantor for the rental agreement?" I asked. "Her brother," he replied. I suggested contacting the guarantor, and then I returned home. When I got home, Susan was crying, and my mother-in-law was comforting her. I pretended not to know anything and went to the bedroom to change. Susan entered my room without knocking. "Can you contact my partner using your mobile phone?" "Mine's been blocked and he's rejecting my calls," Susan said, "but I refuse to contact a stranger using my account." This incident would later lead to Susan harboring resentment against me. Just as my mother-in-law called for Susan from the living room, Susan glared at me, clicked her tongue, and headed to the living room. "Sean told me he got a call from the janitor of your apartment." My mother-in-law was interrogating Susan. "Susan, is it true that you've been delinquent on your rent? And there was a man living in your house. Is he your boyfriend?" Suddenly, Susan burst into anger. "Yes, I came back here intending to start a married life with him. But he wants to go back to his original family, so he left to start over alone." After shouting, she began crying again. Susan's words reached me as I was heading to the living room after changing. I couldn't get in touch with him, so I asked Ashley for help, but she refused. "She's just being mean, making sure we can't contact each other," she raged, directing her anger at me. "How dare she not listen to my request? She's a parasite," she exclaimed childishly, and I hoped faintly that my mother-in-law would rebuke Susan for her words. I thought so too. That woman, despite being an outsider, doesn't understand her place as a daughter-in-law. She's too impudent. My mother-in-law betrayed even that slight hope. "Susan, you are going to live here with him, right? Then that daughter-in-law and her children will have to leave," she said. I had spent so much time catering to my mother-in-law's wishes over my children's. I endured all the sarcasm and abuse, hoping for a return to the enjoyable times I once shared with her. But I realized those days would never come again, and I was deeply disappointed. As I entered the living room, the attacks from my mother-in-law and Susan began. I heard you dared to refuse Susan's request. Didn't I tell you? You are parasites, and you don't have the right to refuse. Because you guys didn't leave, he got fed up and left." I recalled my interaction with Nick in my heart. The reason his boyfriend left is because his original family was important to him, right? He chose his original family over Susan. So, it's not my fault. I provoked Susan deliberately. I knew provoking her would make her even more aggressive. It was clear that being called a parasite and making my children feel unwanted would continue. I decided to cut ties with this family. "You should call him and say, 'Susan is crying,' or 'please come back to her,'" Susan suggested childishly, thinking of naive ways to bring back her lover. Finally reaching my limit with her childish thinking and my mother-in-law's agreement. "If that's what you say, then let's do it. Please give me his phone number." Then I called the number Susan gave me on speakerphone. When Nick answered, I relayed Susan's words directly. "Susan is very sad since you broke up. She's crying, so please come back to her." Nick replied, "I don't know who you are, but I have parted ways with Susan. I love my original family. What I had with Susan was a momentary lapse, and I feel nothing but regret now." Hearing this, Susan went insane and grabbed the phone to start speaking. "Nick, what about the child in my stomach? You should take responsibility and marry me," Susan demanded. "Susan, it wasn't long ago that I bought you medicine and sanitary products because you had severe menstrual pain. Plus, I never had that kind of relationship with you after the shock of my divorce." When Nick countered her argument, Susan fell silent. Nick apologized. "I'm sorry," and hung up. I hoped that now they would understand that Nick left Susan to return to his original family, not because of me, but naturally, that wasn't the case. As soon as the call ended, Susan snapped at me, "Just because it's none of your business, you didn't speak passionately enough. If you had, he might have come back." Susan started screaming. "It's your fault he left even though she is a 35-year-old adult, 3 years older than me." Faced with accusations that would be typical in a children's quarrel, I was dumbfounded. Hearing Susan's breakdown, my mother-in-law said, "That's right. It's all your fault. You're definitely a parasite. Leave this house immediately." "As expected," I replied. "Understood," and began packing. In the evening, when the children returned from school, I told them, "I'm going to divorce your father and leave this house." After a brief thought, my eldest son smiled and said, "That would be best." My daughters smiled similarly. Grandma and aunt were scary, so I wanted to get away soon. I asked the children, "Will you be okay without your father?" My son answered, "Dad was never on our side or Mom's, so it's okay." My daughter asked, "Are we going to live at your grandma's place on your side?" Just the three of us. It seemed she wasn't concerned about her father at all. Soon after, my husband came home. While I was packing and not greeting him, he entered the room furiously after hearing the story from his mother and sister. Here begins the final scenario I had imagined. "Hey, you upset Mom and Susan. Didn't I tell you to just listen to Mom?" He repeated his usual phrase. "I understand. That's why I'm listening and leaving this house. Also, please sign this." I glared at my husband and spread the divorce papers in front of him. "Where will the 3 parasites go now?" He started signing with ease. "Even if you divorce a jobless parasite like you can't support 2 kids, can you?" he said as he returned to the living room. Then I called my brother and asked, "Could you come with a truck tomorrow morning to pick us up?" I had discussed my mother-in-law and husband's behavior with my brother before, and I had informed him about Susan's sudden arrival. My parents had heard the entire situation from my brother and had advised me to divorce, so the conversation was quick. Over the phone, my brother encouraged me, "Ashley, you've done well so far. Don't blame yourself." I felt somewhat relieved. The next day, my brother and his colleagues came with a truck, and they helped us move our belongings quickly. Susan, who coldly watched the proceedings with crossed arms, barely reacted when I said, "Please take care of your mother." She entered the house expressionlessly. Our new home was in a family-friendly room in a building owned by my father, located right next to my parents' house. Due to a vacancy, we were able to rent it at a low cost. My parents had suggested living together, but after being repeatedly called parasites by my husband's family, I didn't want to impose. The children were thrilled with the new apartment. They had already decided on their own rooms and were happily helping with the unpacking. It was a healing moment to hear their laughter a long time. Then my phone rang. It was my ex-husband sounding frantic. "Mom is in trouble. She's dripping excrement. She's calling for the slave to clean it up, so come quick." "Why should I come?" I responded casually. "Of course you should. Mom said you have to do it. Hurry up. The whole house stinks." As if he had forgotten we were in the process of getting divorced, I replied, "What? I'm a complete stranger now, haha," and he exploded in anger. "After I've taken care of 3 parasites for so long, you can't even do this much." I could endure being called a parasite myself, but I reached my limit when he included the children. "Did you know your mother has dementia?" I've talked about the hospital's diagnosis several times, but you probably didn't listen. I even have video proof. I wouldn't go to your house, where you call my precious children parasites. since it's your beloved mother's smell. Think of it as an air freshener and bear with it. I let it all out in a rush. With my usually quiet and compliant self suddenly changing, my ex-husband was stunned into silence. Your mother is rated as requiring level 2 care, so she needs help from waking to sleeping. It's tough, but good luck. I hung up and blocked his number. Susan also called, screaming, "Come clean up immediately," but I silently hung up and blocked her too. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my parents' house from my ex-husband detailing the tragic current situation of his family. Since I left, my mother-in-law, lacking someone to bully, has advanced in her dementia. Susan had returned home under the pretense of being pregnant and wanting to give birth at home just to live comfortably, but my ex blamed Susan for the lack of a caregiver for his mother. They searched for a care facility but only found expensive ones they couldn't afford, so they continued caregiving at home. Susan wanted to return to her previous apartment, but since the guarantor, my ex, had failed to pay the overdue rent and terminated the lease, she had no place to go and had to continue caregiving. Reluctantly, my ex and Susan took care of their mother, constantly fighting over who should do the caregiving. Ironically, although my mother-in-law sometimes forgets who my ex and Susan are, she never forgets to call me the slave. Waking up to the morning sun streaming through the window felt like a blessing for a new start in life for me and the kids. I have a pharmacist's license and hospital experience, but currently work in a drugstore. Returning to society after 10 years is challenging, but any hardship feels minor compared to living with my ex's family. The children quickly made friends at their new school and enjoy their daily routines. Above all, I am grateful that we can spend our days smiling as a family.